Hey everyone, and welcome to my palette declutter. This is the first declutter in my spring declutter series. I'm going to be decluttering all of my palettes today. I'll also be decluttering my eyeshadow singles, foundations, cream blushes, bronzers, the list goes on. So if you're interested in seeing my collection of makeup, what I'm going to be passing along, what I still need to test, these videos are definitely going to be for you. So I would love for you to subscribe. My name's Amanda and I would love to have you back. So kind of a quick note on the way I declutter. There are some items that I keep typically as more of like a library item. This definitely falls under that category. Do you already know I'm going to be decluttering it? This is an item that I keep to reference a formula to essentially be able to create better reviews for you guys to go back, reference, swatch. But I do think that within the library category, it's important for me to remember throughout this declutter that there are plenty of these items that I will really never need to reference again. I definitely can't predict the future, but I'm going to try and be a little bit more strict with it this time around. It really is time for me to clear out. There are also palettes that I'm going to keep because I just love them. But if you see me specifically keeping a palette, even though I don't like it, it goes into my makeup library rather than the rotation of what I'm using constantly. But I definitely think it's time to show some love, gather up some products, and definitely donate and give them to my friends. But this palette will not be one of those items. I'm just going to start here. This is an old Morphe palette, the only Morphe palette that I have ever bought, and I think I bought it just to have a better gauge of what Morphe was about, what the shadows were like. And I do think Morphe was great just to make a lot of different colorful eyeshadows accessible to a lot more people, but you know, we have so many brands that do it better now. By the way, guys, Spindrift has sparkling teas now. This is green tea with mint. It is bomb. And also another note, guys, my nails are not doing well. I swear to God, I pay for a gel manicure like months after. But I am wearing my Dior Nail Glow today and I really feel like it's doing a decent job of covering it up. I'll leave it linked down below in case you guys are interested. It's supposed to be like a French manicure in a bottle kind of thing. Let's first start off with the Natasha Denona Glam palette. Will I be keeping this? My answer has never been easier. It's a yes. Something that I really enjoy about the Glam palette is the color story. Something that you're going to be noticing is that I really enjoy more cool neutrals. And this palette has some absolutely incredible mattes that I always reach for when I just want like that soft smoky wing. I want my blend to look really seamless. And some of these cooler metallics in here, they just have this sparkle to them that just always gets me. A lot of the deeper shades have incredible dimension. They blend super evenly. And I know apparently everyone was talking about this palette for a while. I still wholeheartedly think that cool toned eyeshadow palettes are very underrated, and I am just waiting for the day when more brands come out with them. So this is definitely, you know, within my top 10 eyeshadow palettes. Certainly will be keeping this. Another palette I will certainly be keeping is this one from Dior. I also have another one around here. Here we are. I have two Dior palettes. This was my first Dior palette. It is the New Look palette. And then I also have, I would consider this to be like the daytime version of the New Look palette, which is Soft Cashmere. So I have two of them right here. The reason I absolutely adored this palette in 2022 is that it is essentially like my perfect smoky palette. I have this shade right over here, which is just a perfect one and done. So I can just use that on its own and get like a beautiful kind of oyster pearl from Charlotte Tilbury kind of vibe. But there's also this incredible gunmetal shade that I find to be incredibly beautiful and wet looking. Then on top of that, you have this glittery topper, which I will say that I think there are other glittery toppers in this realm that are prettier than this one. So on its own, I don't think that it's like the best one that I've ever tried. However, it's still really pretty. Hopefully you guys can tell, just like this added right into the middle of an eye look really brings it to life. And I think there's something to be told about a concept together. How many of us are using 15 different palettes to get ready? We're not really. And then this shade right over here, very dark, rich, cool toned brown. And then a shade I don't really use a lot. I think because honestly, if I'm being completely honest here, I sound kind of stupid saying this. Sometimes I forget that this is an eyeshadow because I'm just assuming this is a quad. I've had much less of that trouble with the Soft Cashmere palette. But look at that gorgeous, like purpley brown. I didn't think that I could love an eyeshadow palette more than this one. And I'll even put up one of my favorite looks I've ever done was with this palette. And it's one of, I think, the looks that you guys liked the most out of me. I do think that I prefer even the Soft Cashmere palette. And this is why. This is one of the best eyeshadows that I've ever used. And I'll talk more. I have a single eyeshadow from Dior that I absolutely loved, have talked about for a really long time, called Beige Mitza. I'll talk about that in my single eyeshadow video, but this is one of my favorite shadows from Dior, if not my favorite. Look at this intense, wet metallic. It just brings this beautiful purpley pink shine, but it still has this really nice soft brown dimension. It doesn't read too pink, which I really, really enjoy. This really gorgeous, it's almost like a mix between a metallic and a satin. You can see it does have a little bit of a shift to it, but I see it as more satin, and it goes so beautifully with that shade just to give it a little bit of dimension. Another really pretty sparkly topper that you can add right on top of either of these shadows. I think the difference between the two sparkly toppers is that the one within the New Look palette is a little bit more concentrated, whereas this one is a touch more scattered. Both are very beautiful. And then look at this shade in the middle here. Again, we're dealing with all of these shades on their own could be really perfect one and done shadows. And this matte brown is just an absolute pleasure to work with. Sorry for the awkward swatch on that, but God, there really is something about that shade from the New Look palette that still gets me. I'm almost noticing, because obviously I have my green backdrop that I'm actually using like on my filming table today. I thought you guys might appreciate that, a little, you know, nod to the green backdrop. But I'm almost noticing today this subtle green note to this that I haven't noticed before. I've spent a lot of time on these, but what I'm saying here is that I'm keeping both and I really enjoy both. Really need to try to remember to do these swatches on my palm rather than the top of my hand, because for some reason my swatches never want to come off there. Now this is a palette that I'm so torn on. I do feel like I need to give this another go. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's the Major Dimension eyeshadow palette from Patrick Ta. I personally really enjoy these two shades over here. They have just some incredible life to them. Great shine. This one over here is my personal favorite. This shade right here is very similar to Natasha Denona Peach, which is a product you can't get anymore. So, you know, if you are interested in that, you can't find it anymore. You know, this palette does have a little bit of those wetter looking shimmers over here that I typically really like, but it is just very decidedly warm. Oh, I forgot. This sequin shade is really pretty as well. Just one of those things, I find myself not reaching for it because it's so decidedly warm. However, these mattes blend really nicely. They are quite pigmented, so it's just something that you have to keep in mind. Did I really just put this swatches directly on my hand like I just said I wasn't gonna do? Anyway, I think I'm going to keep it for now, but this is definitely like next on the chopping block. Again, not that it's a bad palette, it just isn't, you know, inspiring to me. A palette I will be passing along is the Flower Beauty Desert Lights palette. Honestly, I don't know why I still have this. I could have sworn I already decluttered this. A lot of people really enjoy this palette, but unfortunately on my eyes, these shadows just look really thick and heavy, and that's something I personally don't like. It kind of just makes my lids look heftier, like weightier. I don't know how else to describe it. Hopefully you guys understand what I mean by that. They're just not the most lightweight looking metallics. And I do think that there are other metallics that have just as beautiful colors, are still affordable. I think there are other products that look more lightweight and are just as shiny as these. So I will be decluttering this one now. This little palette here is from Chanel. It is the Tissé Vendôme. This palette was so underwhelming for me. I don't know what to say about it. It actually doesn't swatch half bad either. It has more of like a baked kind of formula for, you know, the everyday makeup user that wants a little piece of luxury. It's not bad, but I just found myself putting this on and being like, where did my money went to something that doesn't feel necessarily magical or necessarily even luxury. I don't think the formulas scream luxury to me. They definitely scream, you know, that European effortless vibe, but not necessarily luxury. I know that's probably going to be a controversial opinion. Honestly, there's kind of a part of me that wants to keep this for the library, but honestly, I feel like one of my friends might want this. So I think I'm going to tentatively declutter that one. Speaking of luxury, should we talk about Pat McGrath? I do have quite a few of her palettes. Don't have every Pat McGrath launch. I only really got into Pat McGrath, I guess it was 2 years ago now. But I do have the following palettes. I have the Moonlit Seduction palette. I have the Sublime palette. I think it's called Sublime. It's not even on the packaging, which kind of annoys me. I have the Utopian Dream palette, which has a shade that needs to be repressed. I have to be careful with that palette. And I also have here my favorite, the Divine Rose palette. So I think I'm just going to start with this one and let you guys know that, of course, I will be keeping it. When you look at this palette comparatively to like the other Pat McGrath palettes, this to me feels like it's most worth the price tag in the sense that you can get so many everyday looks out of this and really get your money's worth, but you also get a look into, you know, the Pat McGrath world and formula. Like this, you know, I don't even know how many times I've swatched this for you guys, but this special shade is still one of the most beautiful eyeshadows that I've ever used within this palette. I am almost always getting asked what I'm wearing when I have this shade on. You know, I think a lot of us are familiar with Pat McGrath at this point, but the mattes feel to me, they act similar to creams in the sense that they are quite forgiving, but they still have this really beautiful, rich pigment that I have come to expect with Pat McGrath. Blendable, really pretty colors. I mean, this kind of like antique gold is just a classic shade. All over the lid, call it a day. Because it's a palette I've gotten the most use out of, I find that this is, in my opinion, like the most worth the Pat McGrath price tag. One that I also really love is the Utopian Dream palette. This is a very inspired palette, and even though it's, you know, it's a little bit brighter than I would even typically go for, I find myself reaching for this when I want to play. Like this special shade in here, though I do think it is in some of her other palettes, you know, very similar at least. It is nevertheless absolutely beautiful. This purple shade we all know and love, I feel like, if you know this palette, and it is just a standout in so many ways. But again, you could also just stick with this quad over here and get some really nice neutral looks while also kind of taking advantage and journeying into Pat McGrath Fantasyland. This is another recommendation. I do love that palette and will be keeping it. Now, this one from Pat McGrath, I do like it, but it's not my favorite. I do think I like the other two palettes I mentioned a little bit more. The mattes in here are really beautiful. I like that I have access to cool toned mattes in the Pat McGrath formula, because I do think that these mattes are even better than the Natasha Denona formula. So this might be a case where I depan these and just take these three. I think for now I'm going to keep it for these mattes as long as I can declutter some other mattes that I know I'm not going to be getting any use out of. So for now, I'm going to keep this. And lastly, we have the Moonlit Seduction palette. This was actually a pretty big disappointment for me. There are like some standout shades, like this shade over here. I'll give you guys a swatch. I think that is absolutely stunning. I love this shade that a lot of people were going gaga over, to press that on top and give it like this gorgeous wet purple reflection. All three of these shades are not truly like the special baked formula that I'm used to with the other palettes. They're a little bit creamier, reminding me of the creamy sparkly formula within the Patrick Ta palettes. Though the mattes are absolutely beautiful, as a whole, and it does pain me to say this, it's interesting because I do feel like color story wise now, if I saw both of these, I would lean towards this palette just because of all of the wet looking sparkles. But knowing the formulas on each of these, I don't know. I think for now I am going to keep this kind of with the library in mind. I always get questions about other Pat McGrath palettes when I review new Pat McGrath palettes, so it is nice to have them on hand, but you know, with the caveat, just letting you guys know that, you know, Divine Rose and Utopian Dream are like the two recommendations from Pat McGrath. A palette I will be decluttering is this one from Revolution. I was really excited about this palette because I was hoping it would be an alternative to another Anastasia palette. This one right here, which is the Nouveau palette. Color story on this palette is just incredibly similar to this one, but unfortunately, though these apply really beautifully and they blend nicely, they just don't last on my eyes for some reason. So I will be decluttering the Ultimate Desire palette. I will be keeping the Nouveau palette from Anastasia. I really enjoy the mattes, but I gotta be honest, some of these, this like purple, I very rarely reach for. I do think going into spring, a palette like this is just a really pretty, neutral, still a little fun kind of palette. Belle and Liberty are two of my most used shades, as well as Hope. I'm kind of obsessed with green. I think I might like the Rose Metals palette from Anastasia even more. This one, you wouldn't think this is decidedly green, but I just get the richness from these greens and these mattes more than I do with the Nouveau. This shade Haze is insane. I mean, look at that. Ridiculous. Finally, down here is kind of like one of those sparkly top coat situations that you can put on top, which again, if you haven't noticed, I really enjoy having that option within a palette. Ooh, I didn't mean to really dig my finger in there, but again, just blendable, smooth mattes. This is a whole eye look right here. Like, no time, not a lot to think about. And very quick, Nova. I feel like I have to swatch this for you guys. Look at Nova. Like, what? These kind of green golds always get me. I always lean towards like an olive gold, an antique gold, rather than a really, really warm toned gold. So I think that if you were to pick between the two, I do prefer, you know, color story wise, in general, this feels like even more inspired and fun and like delicious. The Rose Metals palette for sure, but I do also like the Nova. So I'm going to be keeping both of those. Now let's talk about some Tom Ford. I have 3 different palettes here. Let's first talk about, wait, I should have a 4th. Here you are. So I'm just gonna come out and say, out of all the palettes I've tried from Tom Ford, this is my favorite. It is the Smoky Quartz Cream Eyeshadow Palette from Tom Ford. By far, I think that this is Tom Ford's best launch that I've used. It's a completely different formula from the other palettes, which I don't think is, you know, a coincidence. So these are essentially just creamier powders. I don't even consider them to be truly creams. They have just a really beautiful blend to them. I love doing a more structured, neutral, matte cream shadow look with this. My only complaint is I almost always have to use an eye base with these because they don't last as long as I would like. And it does make me, you know, wary of this just because in general, it's just a bummer that I would have to worry about longevity with such an expensive palette. However, I do like it, so I am going to keep it. Now, 2 of these have to go. I don't know, Nude Dip, or let's see, Golden Mink. This is even like, I've barely got any use out of this. Yeah, I think I'm going to give away Golden Mink. I'm not even going to give you guys swatches. Just know that I picked this up, saw these 2 really pretty glittery top coat looking shadows, and they just aren't wet enough. They're not glittery enough. I'm expecting a lot at this price point. So color story's not bad, but I just needed more. So there's definitely someone that could get more use out of that. It's barely used. I'm going to pass along this Naked Pink palette. I don't think you can really even get it anymore. All of these colors are sad. And I basically spent all my money to get this one glittery top coat, which you could literally just buy Space Cowboy from Urban Decay, a single shadow. So do not do as I do. You know, on the quest for the best wet looking eyeshadows, this is kind of what, you know, happens to me. So I'm going to give away both of those Tom Ford palettes, and I'm going to keep Nude Dip in the library. Just because I'm keeping this doesn't mean that I recommend it. It's more so to reference this kind of wet to dry formula so that I can better give you guys information to make a better purchasing decision in upcoming videos. You know, my job here is to make sure that you guys are as well informed as possible when I do these reviews, and something like this will help me do that. But there are a couple of library books that do need to be passed along to the trash because they're just too old. This Lorac Pro palette, you guys, I think I had this in college, like maybe a little bit after college. No, you don't stay now. You're too old, unfortunately. I really hung on to this for a long time, the Naked 3 palette, just because I absolutely love the color story. But the last time I hung on to it, the formula was barely hanging on, and it right now is even less likely to hang on. It's nothing anymore. It's a little bit dried up, so this will be needing to be recycled. Spindrift Break. And I have glitter all over my backdrop, so we're gonna have to throw this thing in the wash after this video. However, we'll be keeping my Lorac Noir palette, which is my most used palette of this year. I absolutely love it. Oh my god, it's crazy. When you see this palette alone, you're like, oh, it's perfect size, great for travel. But then when you compare it to something like the Anastasia palette, you really see how little product you get in each pan, but you do get more shades. So it's just really about what you want. Not a lot of us go through an entire eyeshadow palette necessarily. This shade over here, You can see how much I've used it already. Stunning. I mean, I use it almost every time I open this palette. This wet, glossy topper to go right on top. I almost always add that as well. All of these glittery, sparkly top coats are like right at your disposal to mix and match. You also do have some of these more metallic shades. The color story of this, the shades, the way they look, it reminds me of so many of my favorite eyeshadow palettes and single shadows all put into one, which is why I've kind of simplified my routine a lot of days and just use this. I mean, there are some shades that are so reminiscent of Charlotte Tilbury, Dior, Urban Decay. The matte formula is also really great, blendable. It's not like the best matte formula out there. Like, I do think that the Anastasia is like a little bit better, but I think that the sparkles within the Noir palette are slightly better than the ones from Anastasia. So really it's like a preference thing, it's a texture thing. Both are great. A palette that I really wanted to be like a hidden gem was this CoverGirl Clean palette. It has great pigment, but it's just so flat to me. Like, I hope you guys can see, like, I don't know. That is so one-dimensional and flat. Just the color story, you know, maybe I just picked the wrong color story. You guys can let me know down below if I did. Just a bit boring. So I am going to declutter that one. I don't foresee needing to reference that just because it's not like a super popular formula. Next, we have the Persona Identity palette. This is untouched, basically, I think. Hold on. I don't think I've even opened this. And if I haven't, I am going to go ahead and declutter it. I'm going to try and do my due diligence. Take a look here. Yeah, I have not even touched this. Maybe one swatch that I could possibly see. So this is going to be going to one of my friends. They sent it to me. I didn't go out and buy it, so I'm going to pass that along. I do have a couple of Sigma palettes here. This palette is really beautiful, but it's basically untouched, the Ambience palette. So I am going to pass that along. I am going to keep this one though, because this is my favorite, the Enchanted palette. It is super similar though to the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. Like just a similar overall vibe. I don't know, guys. I don't think that I should be keeping both. I absolutely love this shade from the Huda Beauty. I almost always reach for it. Look at that. And the similar shade is this one from Sigma. Actually, it has less base pigment. But do you see how they both have this kind of like, I don't know, I just get like fairy vibes from these palettes. Both are absolutely beautiful for spring. And I am, you know what? I am also getting like Zenon, Girl of the 21st Century from these palettes too. All right, I'm gonna have to make a decision on that. I can't make that decision yet. I'm like feeling myself getting stuck, and rather than like sitting in the stuckness, I'm gonna keep rolling. For now, I'm going to keep them both in the declutter pile and then figure out what is happening. Now, this ColourPop of Quartz palette is pretty. I do think it's really pretty, but it's kind of giving me the same problem that the Clean palette from CoverGirl gave me. This might even, I think it might be too gray for me. This color over here though is very, it is pretty, but it's not swatching great. I think it's really nice. The sequin shade is pretty. I don't know, but some of the metallics are just a little blah for me. I think I'm going to declutter that one as well. Pass that along. All right, we're definitely making some room in the declutter pile. I feel good about that. You can also pass along this palette from Play. I don't really know a lot about this brand, but this is just not something I see myself reaching for. Cool package though, and I like that it's all paper, but yeah, I am going to be passing that along. It's unused, so someone can get a lot of use out of that. My cream palettes from Revlon, I will be keeping both of these. One of my favorite hidden gems that I like to talk about with you guys. Now, these are not new. They're quite old in the sense that they've been around for a really long time. But are they the best cream formula out there? No. Do they have like really pretty color stories? Yeah, and I actually like this one even more, which is the Precious Metals palette. The shades are very similar actually to the 52 degree palette from Rowan, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You need a primer with these, I think, if you want something with great longevity, but if you want something to just kind of swipe on the lids, something really easy, I just think that these are a good affordable option. You know what? I do think I'm gonna pass this one along though. The Not Just Nudes, because I really don't reach for this. However, this palette I do reach for a little bit more. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep the Revlon. I barely reach for this Visart palette. I don't know why, because the formulas are good. I think what I want to do with this palette is get a feel for it, maybe use it to help out some of my friends with their makeup. I have like a lot of weddings coming up. So you know what? Maybe you guys let me know down below. I'll keep this for now. If you guys aren't really interested in it, you can go ahead and say declutter and I'll pass it along. But if you are interested, then I can review it for my channel. Okay, why is this half lash on this? It's a really nice half lash too. Now this is a palette I still have to try. It's from Floralysis, or Floralysis, yes. First of all, it is one of the most beautiful palettes I've ever seen, ever. It's gorgeous. I don't know what else to say. It's a piece of art. And I still need to give this a go. I have done some swatching and the formula is like this really cool kind of gel baked formula. I actually am a big fan of their face palette. I really like their lip tints as well. I think this brand is doing some really cool stuff. So I am keeping this. I still need to try it out. It's very luxuriously priced, but I do think that they're giving you something that feels inspired, which for me, you know, with luxury makeup, I like it to make me feel excited. And you know what? This is a good example of a palette that makes me feel really excited. One of my other favorite eye looks I've ever done is with this palette. It is like the perfect mod eye palette. So if you love that 60s look, you have everything that you need just right here. You can get beautiful matte looks with these. They blend beautifully. You also have this really like trendy pop of blue, which honestly I don't use a ton, but all of these shades I certainly reach for. And it's e.l.f., so it's affordable. It's the Cookies and Dream palette. That I do think is a good one, so I'm going to be keeping that. Another affordable palette I love. I just did a dedicated video on this, I think last month. The Lorac Mini Pro palette in Mystic Oak. Just a gorgeous palette. I love finding these little hidden gems, and I know that it's not that like no one knows about this, but honestly, when I saw this, I had never heard a single person talk about it until I looked and searched for more information on this. And the swatches are really what got me. But you have this gorgeous wet sparkly topper right out of the gate. This shade right here is like Oyster Pearl from Charlotte Tilbury. Very similar. It's just that taupey brown that's just so pretty. This shade I like, but not as much as this one. It's a little bit more of like a yellow topper, kind of reminiscent of the formula of like the Rowan shadows. I just prefer something a little bit smoother and a little bit more wet looking. This shade, I mean, I need a little bit more. It's like gorgeous, awesome blue, kind of that gritty blue shade. The mattes are great as well. Just a good matte black. And then this camel, it's kind of like a mustard camel color, which these are like my favorite matte shadows to put in my crease and like set everything. I just feel like they're so flattering with cooler tone looks. Very balanced, great palette for travel, beautiful looks I've gotten out of this, and it's so affordable. So it's just one of those palettes for me. I will certainly be keeping this. Palette I do think I'm going to be decluttering is this one from Buxom. All three of these shimmer shades, they're pretty, but they all look virtually the same on the eyes except for this one. These two shades look exactly the same. This soft kind of satin shade, there's just not enough dimension happening here for me to feel really good about the look. It's also a little bit peachier than I would even normally go for. Not to say there's anything wrong with it, it just is a little bit blah to me. So I am going to pass that along. I'm also going to be passing along the LA Girl Foreplay palette. This was just, again, really meh to me. The shimmers have like no shine, no reflection. They're just very flat metallic. In general, like just because something is metallic and it has sparkle doesn't mean it's reflective. The size of the glitters, the way they're shaped, the quality, I can tell that this is affordable. I can tell this is cheap. I wanted it to be this kind of affordable green color story that I could recommend for you guys, and unfortunately it is not. All right, I do have some of my Rowan palettes here. I think I pulled out all of them. They are looking very clean, clearly. First, we have the 52 degree palette, which is one of my favorites. The second palette that I tried, and I'm so glad that I tried it because the first one I tried was the 75 degree palette. However, this one I absolutely loved. The color story, everything about it, I love. First of all, I'm going to show you these two shades because I think that these are my favorite, though I do love the blue as well. Look at this, guys. You want a wet, glossy looking eye look all in one. Gorgeous kind of textured cream is the best way I can describe them. I mean, they're just stunning. I always love the looks that I come out with when I have these. I always notice that my eyes feel pretty. So that is what a good concept, a good makeup artist is going to come up with. Obviously, Nikki DeRoast was the one that came up with this concept in the original formulas. And she also did come out with the 1111 palette, which is one of my favorite palettes I've ever used. This is my perfect, slightly peachy pink palette for the spring. It's one of my favorite spring palettes ever since I tried it. First of all, you have this, of course, then I start with the shade that's the least that. But look at this, guys. This gorgeous gunmetal. You know, it looks decidedly gunmetal, but it's really not when you take a second look. It has all of these multi-dimensional glitters. There's blues in here, there's pinks in here that really make it something different. This shade down here is gorgeous. Again, they just have this kind of quality to them that makes them come alive, not only in the finish, which the finishes are quite wet and reflective, but in the multi-dimensional glitters within the shades. If you want more of a chunky kind of scattered glitter effect, you can go with this shade, but it is pretty, but it's just more chunky. The best way I can describe it, and the way I've always felt about this, is that I don't know if you guys have ever seen the way that like seashells break, how they kind of fleck off. This has kind of a flecked texture to it that gives you like a very textured look that I think is really cool, and it's grungy and pretty. I think I prefer something a little bit smoother and more of that wet, thin, glossy, uniform smoothness to my looks, which is why I really love these shades. Wholeheartedly, I still absolutely adore this palette. So I'm certainly keeping those. You know, I think it's really difficult with the makeup market to come out with something truly unique, and Rowan did that. And it's just such a shame that Nikki didn't stay with the company, because I do think that things changed a little bit, and that's when we get into these newer palettes. So we have the Mood Forever as well as the Gold Lust palette. I was so excited to try the Gold Lust palette. We'll start here. But let me give you guys a little reminder of what I feel like essentially this palette is. It is essentially, it feels like the same, it just feels like a Revlon palette with a sparkly, granted, very gorgeous kind of antique gold added to it. This formula isn't anything to necessarily write home about. Are they pretty? Yes. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that they're wrong. There's nothing awful about them. It's just like I'm expecting more. I'm expecting drama, impact, and that shade gives it to me. This kind of newer, essentially powder pressed glitter formula that they've added. This is giving me something different and pretty. These are very just typical satin shades. I don't know. I'm not blown away by it. So I am, you know, I do feel like maybe I should keep both and then do an updated kind of comparison between these two. I think I'm going to do that just because I can see that being a fun video, even if it's just something quick. But I know I need to pass this along. This is the Mood Forever. I have clearly gone in on this shade over here because I think it's beautiful. It is beautiful. Again, it just has this gorgeous kind of reflection to it, but I think the reason I love this is it reminds me of the 1111 palette. Granted, I do think that this shade over here is a little bit better as far as reflection goes comparatively to the Gold Lust palette, but this is just not doing it for me. So I am going to pass that along, and I am going to take these two palettes and keep them and make a note to do that kind of in-depth comparison for you guys. Or if not in-depth, you know, I think that'd be a fun little video for YouTube shorts. So just a reminder, if you guys aren't subscribed, make sure to subscribe for my upcoming clutters, but also for that video. And it'll probably be on YouTube shorts, I think. All right, we are on the home stretch here. I have the Naked Foxy palette, and though this is pretty, it just does not blow me away. I would much rather reach for like the Nuvo palette from Anastasia than this. Great for travel, but it's barely used. I just think that I should pass this along to one of my friends. Or this, you know, I would say even between these two palettes, now that we're on the subject, the Mini Gold palette from Natasha Denona, I'm pretty sure is cheaper. I want to say it's cheaper, but these are just giving better quality to me. Intense, gorgeous pigment. Whereas the, you know, shade over here, Get Down, which is, you know, decently similar. Which would you prefer? I mean, there is no wrong answer. Everyone has a different preference. But for me, I'm leaning towards that Natasha Denona formula. The Naked formula is just a little bit drier. I don't know, for me, it feels like the Naked has to be decluttered, and I will be keeping the Mini Gold palette from Natasha Denona. I do think that these mini palettes from Natasha Denona are a great way to get her formulas at an affordable price. And I don't think that people talk about these enough. You know, people talk a lot about the larger palettes, but I still firmly think that these are a great way to try out a beautiful formula without having to put up a lot of money. Which I think was kind of the intent, to make Natasha Denona a little bit more accessible to more people, so I just feel good about that. Now, I think it's finally time to say goodbye to these M Cosmetics palettes. Not because they're bad, I don't reach for them. The last declutter I did, I'm pretty sure that I said I needed to get more use out of these, and then I didn't. Again, there's nothing wrong with them necessarily. I really like the mattes in particular, but I think now I want something more from the metallics. They just feel, again, a little flat. They don't feel necessarily like that multi-dimensional, super sparkly, wet looking glitter. They're just, again, they're a little flat for my taste. So I will be passing both of these along. And I will be getting rid of this palette. Anyone remember this? Look at this, guys. It is the Kat Von D Shade and Light Eye Palette. More brands should come out with a concept like this. I think I really like this because essentially this is the Natasha Denona Glam palette if it was just mattes. But you know, I never use this anymore. It was more of a library item, and I'm not referencing it. And Kat Von D is, you know, not my favorite person, I guess. So why keep something that I'm not referencing? That is the whole point of the library, and you know, in theory. I do have some K-Beauty palettes. This one is from 3CE, and this is the Overtake palette. I haven't used this one in a bit. I am going to hang on to it. I picked this up specifically for these sequin shades. I love the way that K-Beauty does a sequin shade. I just feel like they're more common and they're just not afraid to go there. I do want to keep playing with this one. I think that the looks I've gotten before are pretty. That glitter is really nice. I haven't been like gun-ho amazed by this palette yet. And it wasn't necessarily cheap if I'm remembering correctly, but I do have some upcoming K-Beauty videos that I want to keep this for. So I'll be keeping that. I'm also keeping this Roman palette for that video. It is, what? It's called like the Fog. Yeah, Dusty Fog Garden palette. Very, very cool toned. I actually wish, even though like I knew what I was getting into with this palette, I still don't think I knew I was getting into something this cool toned. I mean, with a lack of variety, I should say. These three shades look very, very similar and will look so similar on the eyes. And then these two shades do too. I mean, and even these two shades next to each other might be pretty similar once on the eye. So, you know, in general, I think they could have given us more variety with this one. But I still will be keeping it for just for that upcoming video. Because, you know, I've been testing it and I don't think the formula is bad at all. This is going to be in the library one of my most disappointing palettes that I've ever used. Can't get it anymore. I don't know why Makeup by Mario decided to do that. The Ethereal Eyes palette. When I tell you this was, I was ready for this to be like my holy grail eyeshadow palette. I mean, I was. It's my ideal color story. And actually now that I'm looking at it, it's very similar to the Divine Rose palette from Pat McGrath. So if you missed out on this, I would certainly say go with the Divine Rose over this palette. The reason being is that the mattes are just kind of meh. I don't know. They're very dry looking. I don't know. They're just very dusty and a little dry. This shade right here, you can see I've, you know, really dug my finger into. It's gorgeous. But all three of these are so similar that they could have given us more variety there, I think. I think they also could have been more glittery, like these two shades. This shade, however, I'm obsessed with and I really do love. I mean, that is stunning. And then add a little bit of this on top. I mean, it's beautiful. But for the price I paid to only have like a couple shadows that I'm really, really into was just disappointing for me. Overall, I love the packaging. I love the quality, magnetized. I think the color story is pretty, but unfortunately the formula just missed the mark for me. I'll be keeping it for the library to kind of reference. And now I'm wondering if I should do a little video comparing the Makeup by Mario to the Divine Rose. I need to remember all these video ideas that are coming to my head right now. Maybe you guys can let me know down below. Give me a little reminder. Now I have a couple of Ether Beauty palettes. I think I am going to get rid of this one because I don't reach for it. It's the Ether Amorite Mini Crystal palette. Nothing wrong with it. It just, the formula in and of itself, again, it's a little bit flat for me. Not bad, but just, again, there are other textures and reflection types that I prefer, so I'm going to pass that one along, but I am going to keep the Rose Quartz Crystal palette because I do really like this one. I really enjoy the color story. I've just noticed with this palette that there's more reflection. I'm just getting more pigment payoff with these. I actually think that the mattes are really beautiful as well. particularly the mattes. So I am going to keep that one. Charlotte Tilbury palettes. This one, the Rebel palette, I will be keeping. I actually just recently talked about this. It's such an easy green, warm toned palette that I find myself reaching for a lot. I love this sequin shade. This sequin shade it's everything. Really, really pretty. Also really like the Smoky Eyes Are Forever palette. I actually was using that all weekend. I don't have it because it's at my friend's house, which reminds me I need to go over there and get that. But I am going to keep the Rebel palette, and I think I'm going to pass along the Super Nudes palette. This is a beautiful palette to just like have on hand, throw in your purse. There are a lot of like satin shades. By the way, this shade I absolutely adore. Oh God. It's that perfect kind of purpley brown shade that just all over the lid is the perfect one and done. It's just so smoky and elegant. There's a lot to love about this. Actually, you know, the longer I think about it, I don't know why I don't reach for this more. I mean, the way these satins kind of have this reflection, but they're still super thin. That's what I look for with satin shades. But, you know, I do still think I should pass it along. I think that there are folks that are going to get more use out of this than me. Running out of room on where to store all this stuff. You guys, I just dropped my Lisa Eldridge palette. The top came open and then all of these came out. I guess because it's magnetized that is going to happen, but that has not happened to me before. Just something to keep in mind, but we might as well talk about this palette since it's mad at me for not being brought up earlier. This is the Vega palette from Lisa Eldridge. I really enjoy these two shades down here. Actually, now that I'm here with this palette, it's reminding me of that Charlotte Tilbury Super Nudes palette in the sense that these kind of satiny matte shades have like this similar silkiness to them. But I think that the ones from Lisa Eldridge are even better. These two shades I don't reach for a ton. I'm actually interested in kind of making my own palette. I really want to pick up the Sorcery palette actually, but again, this is the Vega palette. So certainly keeping that one. I also have two of my Revlon So Fierce Prismatic palettes. I've talked about these before as being kind of like some of my favorite hidden gem affordable finds, and I still feel the same way. The Slight Flex palette is just so pretty. It's hard to get like a wet looking eyeshadow like that at an affordable price. The shades I think are so beautifully thought of when added together. This is a baked formula, so you just have to keep that in mind. They're not like intense, super pigmented. But if you prefer a baked formula, if you like something really thin, I think that you might really enjoy these. And let me swatch this one shade for you from the That's a Dub palette, because I always reach for this when I go for that palette. These antique golds like always get me. I will say I do feel like they're drying out just a touch. You know, I've had them for a couple years now, but I don't think a couple years is bad. You know, it says 18 months on here. But let's see how much further they can go, because I still want to use them. Oh, I do have another Sigma palette. This is the Ritzy Shadow palette. I have not given this enough of a go. Oh my God. I don't know why I haven't given this palette a go, because that is my kind of shade. And this is too, right next to it. Oh my gosh. What am I doing? I'm definitely keeping this. Oh, and the sequin shade. This is just what happens when you have too much stuff and then something gets buried. I definitely need to test this out. Like, look at those together. Wow. I think I kind of want to do like a makeup video, or a video that's like two products with the same vibe, because I keep looking back at some of these palettes that, like, you know, the Mystic Oak and this one from CoverGirl, the Sigma Enchanted palette, and the Rose Quartz one from Huda Beauty. I don't know, it's just making me think of a possible video. But anyway, last but not least, we have the Shimmer Saga palette from LH Cosmetics. Honestly, you guys, I should love this. Like, in theory, they're pretty, certainly, but I just don't find myself reaching for them a lot. I think that someone in my life would absolutely love to play with this, and because I'm not using them as much as I thought I would, I think I'm going to give them to that person. All right, so these are all of the palettes that I'm going to keep. If I could fit them all in this one box, that would feel amazing. Wow, guys, and I did it. Oh, even though the box is busting open. All right, so these are all of my palettes that I'm going to keep. We have the palettes to declutter. All right, I don't know. I gotta say, I feel pretty good about that. 2 big boxes of shadow palettes heading out. Thank you guys so much for being here and watching the video. I'm going to try and leave everything I talked about today down below. And if I didn't fit it in the description, I will have a pinned comment for you guys. I will also leave a playlist to my declutter series for you guys if you want to check out some of my other declutter videos. Thank you guys again so much for being here, and I will see you in my next one.